When I opened my email this morning, I really wasn't surprised to find a number of ads for various things. Somehow I got on the list for Groupon and social living, or whatever it's called, and they offer all kinds of bargains. I'm really not a person who does a lot of shopping, as my wife will tell you. I don't really hunt for bargains, but did you know that you could get virtue for half price? It's not an ad I saw on the internet, but it is an ad I saw one time. It's true, almost everything is available at a discount price or a wholesale price, but you never really see virtue advertised at any price. Vice, on the other hand, that's pretty readily available. There's a rather large market for vice. But for virtue? But this ad even suggests that you introduce the virtue to your friends during this special half-price offer. I guess they failed to take into account the feelings of those who assumed that their friends would then be a lot less fun to have around. But listen to the incentives the ad made. There is now more virtue just for you, more of everything you have come to love and enjoy. Another year of virtue for half price, a huge savings. Take advantage of the super bargain and get more virtue for less money than ever before. It sounds so cheap and easy. Unfortunately, everything has a snag because it's too late. The ad expired in 1984. Virtue, it turns out, was a magazine for Christian women. And although the word virtue has a Latin origin, from vir, meaning man, the same root that gives us the word virility, the magazine was marketed only to women. Christian men apparently have all the virtue they already need, or they are very poor prospects for being in the market for more. My text this morning makes a different assumption. It suggests that all of us, in fact, need more, not so much of the heroic and glamorous virtues like courage, bravery, defiance, or strength, the kind of virtues that enable us to leap tall buildings at a single bound like Supergirl or Superman, or rescue drowning children from the bottom of a frozen lake in a Minnesota winter. But we need more of the ordinary virtues that make it possible for us to live in the same household or church community or neighborhood without making one another miserable. In a way, this seems so modest that it may fail to capture our imagination. No one gets a medal for ordinary virtues. Yet when we lack ordinary virtues, we destroy each other. More ironic still, my text tells us to act like decent human beings because we are, of all things, God's chosen ones, holy and beloved. God lays his hand upon us, sets us apart, loves us, and then after doing all that, suggests that behaving in a reasonably civilized manner would be an appropriate response. Not a foundation or ground for his actions, but simply a response to them. It sounds both backward and anticlimactic, and it's not very good for our ego. Worse yet, my text doesn't presume that we, of course, have, not so very deep within us, the capacity to do as we ought. That we need just a little encouragement, or perhaps a favorable environment to stir up the impulse to do right. Hardly. It says rather that we ought to put on these ordinary virtues the way one might put on a coat. Grab a virtue out of thin air and put it on like a coat. Practice by doing by sheer awkward intention what doesn't come naturally. Again, it's not very easy to imagine, and it's easy to condemn as mere play acting or pretending, and not very flattering. However, the image does neatly take away the excuse that we have that we could hardly be expected to do better than we do because we were so naturally ill-endowed. Then there's this unpleasant fact that the whole paragraph is in the plural, addressing not individuals, but a community. It's so much easier to be virtuous without all those other people around. In perfect isolation, we can pride ourselves of our own high moral character. There's a lot we don't learn about ourselves until someone really rubs us the wrong way. We may see ourselves as very forgiving people, for example, until someone gives us a massive or even a little persistent irritant to forgive them. But it's not that we need others to give exercise to our moral muscle, so to speak. The Dutch Reformed theologian Herman Ridderbos reminds us that in Paul's epistles, the fundamental aim of virtues is not individual character formation, but rather the upbuilding of the community of God, the church. And further, Paul obviously takes a discerningly perceptive view of the church. Unlike those who note its manifest imperfections and abandon it as hypocritical, Paul simply assumes that Christians will exhibit many faults. Else the virtues he enumerates in this text would be quite unnecessary. The German pastor and martyr Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote Life Together, a book about Christian fellowship in an underground seminary during the Nazi years, truly captures, I think, the spirit of this passage when he writes, "Only that fellowship which faces such disillusionment with all its unhappy and ugly aspects begins to be what it should be in God's sight. A community which cannot bear and cannot survive such a crisis, which insists upon keeping its illusion when it should be shattered, permanently loses in that moment the promise of Christian community. He who loves his dream of a community more than the Christian community itself becomes a destroyer of the latter, even though his personal intentions may be ever honest and earnest and sacrificial." Consider that. We destroy things and people when we refuse to recognize and deal with their actual faults, insisting instead upon maintaining an idealized image of them. Here then is the setting with which we are faced. God has chosen us. God has set us apart and loved us. God asks us to put on virtues he does not suggest we naturally have within us. God sets his people in communities that are manifestly imperfect and has made the primary goal not the isolated perfection of individual character, but rather of the good of the whole community. God's own acts are the grounds for what he asks of us. What then are the ordinary virtues he requires in this setting? Compassion, kindness, lowliness, meekness, patience, forbearance, and forgiveness. Here are the elements that help to reduce and eliminate friction between people. Compassion, a sort of ready and open sympathy that's not limited to mere feelings but finds expression in action. Kindness, a merciful disposition toward others that loves goodness and what is right. Lowliness or humility. This has nothing to do with self-disparagement or servility, but in the context of community life, it's a trait that almost takes on the sense of unselfishness, or a resolution to subject oneself to others and to be more concerned about their welfare than one's own. It's the Greek word tapenoprosene that Paul, in the epistle to the Philippians, relates to the self-humiliating love of Christ. And then there is meekness, an easy, mild, uncomplaining, unresentful way of relating to others. It's opposed to rudeness and harshness. And patience, slowness to wrath, resentment, or avenging of wrong. All of these stand in direct opposition to that self-assertion that puts my own good or feelings above my neighbor's goods or feelings. Thus, all these affirm what the British writer and philosopher Irish Murdoch said, "In the moral life, the enemy is the fat, relentless ego." All these virtues take others seriously. All these assume that only by refraining from judging everything according to one's own rights, can the unity of the community be maintained. Thus, they are flatly set against the wisdom of our day. Moreover, Paul's further instructions to forbear and forgive one another remind us that we all give cause for complaint or grievance to others. It's a little sobering to consider that these words are not spoken only to us with regard to them, but also to everyone else with regard to each one of us. I know it's not very pleasant to think of ourselves as the sorts of people who require others to grow in the grace of putting on virtues in order to be able to get along with us, but sadly we are. One more thing, the difficulty with Paul's instructions multiplies when we consider that these virtues that presumably counteract the fat, relentless ego do not come in the half-price version that actually feeds the ego. Maybe you've heard people described as perhaps Christians in the worst sense of the word. If you have the same image as I do, you're calling to mind painfully righteous people who debilitate you with their compassion, smother you with their kindness, pardon themselves in their lowliness, manipulate you by their meekness, forgive ostentatiously, have no patience with others' impatience, no forbearance of others' lack of forbearance. Perhaps you've heard of those who live entirely for others, and you can always tell the others by their hunted expressions. With such people, you feel not that you are known and loved and cared for, but rather that you simply exist to provide others an occasion so that they can practice their virtues on you. The ready availability of these half-price virtues, the ones that serve the emotional needs of their practitioners but do not in reality serve the needs of the community,